integrity of sport is key. That drives everything. We need to make sure players are educated, and we need better information flows between industry and regulators.
Although in recent years we've gained quite a lot of knowledge about betting-related match fixing, there are still many unknowns, and there's still a lot of myths and misconceptions in the world that constantly pop up in policy debates. So I would plead for a more evidence-informed debate.
The message today is that sports governing bodies and the betting industry have to work together with law enforcement to combat match fixing. As soon as a sport is fixed, it loses its appeal, apart from the moral issues and the fact that it's totally wrong to do it. If you have fixes in your sport, you're going to turn off sponsors, the money's not going to come in, there's not going to be the prize money for the players, so it has a big impact.
Sport have to communicate. They have to have rules that apply to their members. They have to ensure they investigate if there are breaches, and they must make sure they publicly sanction those players or officials that are corrupt. And operators take responsibility. If we're going to bet on an event, we want the event to be straight, not corrupt, and we want our customers to believe that they bet with us, any one of us, that they're betting with a straight game.
It's important to have things like deterrence strategies in place and education programmes and those mechanisms to recognise when there is a problem. So whether that's an alert system through betting operators, sports having their integrity programmes in place, and sportsmen know who to report to. Otherwise the fixers will find a way in, and if one sport get it right, they will move on to the next one.
If players are not being paid on time for the work that they are doing, they are more likely subject to potentially fix a match than someone who's fully paid on time, who have a proper contract and who have a decent wages to sustain his family. By enforcing proper contract, by having proper working laws that protect the athletes, you're going to be able to tackle at least one part of the problem. It's also important for the athletes to know what integrity is about, so that's why the education part is also really important, because most of the time they have no idea about the rules of their own sports.
Monitoring the betting markets, I think it's a very essential tool to come across possible instances of match fixing. It's probably the only ways to identify where to look. Also, the sports world definitely needs to take responsibility on the sanctioning front as a deterrence function to go after those that breach the disciplinary rules of betting on their own games or passing on inside information.
There are still quite a few countries in Europe that have quite restrictive attitudes towards these betting markets. So I think the first thing is we need to get some sort of joined up thinking amongst all the markets in Europe, because if you've got markets that are not really involved in the process, then it's very difficult to get information from sports in those countries or betting patterns, or also for people that might be involved in corrupt activities who are outside of the sport. So I think the first thing is let's try and get more realisation that online betting as an industry is here to stay.
The start position is to have unified rules across Europe. You know, we are a joined up part of the world, and I think it's very important that we can come together on this and to actually create similar operating conditions across Europe. It's much harder when you go outside Europe, because you're talking about operators that are licensed in places like the Philippines, where they don't have the same level of regulation as you would have in the European markets. That's where it becomes really difficult. I think Europe broadly is getting it right. Could still do better, but it's getting it right, whereas it's the wider world where we have the problems.